What a difference 55 years makes. When Tokyo last hosted the Summer Olympic Games back in 1964, the world and Japan were very different places. It was just 19 years after the atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And in many ways, it was Japan's coming out from the cold.
The moment has finally arrived, the moment we have been waiting for here in Tokyo.
The Japanese were returning to the global stage as a peaceful and confident nation. But it came at a heavy financial cost. Close to the entire national budget was spent on the building project needed for the Games. As a stark contrast, the spend for next year's 2020 Games is less than 1% of their GDP. To symbolise Japan's reconstruction and peace after the Second World War, the torch was carried by a young athlete named Yoshinori Sakai, born in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, the day the bomb was dropped. It was the first Games held in Asia. 93 nations competed in 19 sports. It was also the first time South Africa was barred from taking part because of apartheid. These Games were the first to be telecast internationally without the need for tapes to be flown overseas. In 2019 here in Australia, we chug around cities on our comfortable but not that fast trains. It was way back in 1964, Japan had launched the first bullet trains linking their major cities. At the time of the Summer Games of '64, passengers were connected between Tokyo, Nagoya and Osaka on trains travelling over 500 kilometres per hour. But things generally are vastly different now than what they were. When it came to photography in 1964, film was transported around town on pushbike. Now, of course, images are flashed up around the world by the push of a button. As we look ahead to next year in Tokyo, the motto for the Games is Discover Tomorrow. There will be 206 nations competing in 33 sports, over 11,000 athletes from around the world. The 2020 Games will be broadcast to much of the world in 8K. With huge broadcast deals globally, the Games will be broadcast in the US by NBC as part of a $4.38 billion agreement that began in the 2014 Winter Games in Sochi. From a nation over half a century ago, trying to show the rest of the world it was back, to now, where Japan is at the top of its game as a powerful yet peaceful country. Let the Games begin.
It was fascinating putting that package together to see the parallels of an Olympic Games 55 years ago to what we're going to see in 12 months' time. And joining us now to discuss it, CEO of the AOC, Matt Carroll, Olympian, and our very own Matt Shervington and Jamie Gilbert-Smith, Managing Director of MNC Saatchi Sports and Entertainment. Hello, gentlemen. How are we?
Thanks for having us.
I'll start with you, Shervo, because we just saw the contrast, 1964, 19 years after the Second World War, and here we are 55 years on. It's a very different looking Japan.
Oh, obviously a very different looking Japan, and we've had a period of peace, obviously, within our region, which is very handy. But a really interesting point, I spoke to a very good friend of mine called Hiroyatsu Tuchie, his name is, and he actually was a sprinter. He came out and trained with me before the Sydney Olympic Games. He's now a head coach of their sprint team, and he's going to take the men's 4x100 metre relay team to those Olympic Games as the silver medalist from Rio.
Wow,
They're the
yeah,
pin-up boys. They're the rock stars at the moment. I'll tell you more about them in a moment. But I said, what does this mean for Japan now and the people of Japan, these Games? And he said, it's actually another rebuilding process. And I was sort of misunderstood there. But he said in 2011 they had the earthquake.
Wow,
the Fukushima power plant went down. The tsunami came through. And there was a period of rebuilding throughout the coast, up and down the Japanese coast. And he said, this is still a big part of that. It's still fresh in our minds. And this is, I guess, the consolidation of our rebuilding and presentation to the world that we're back and we're completed and we're rebuilt.
Matt, it's hard to believe that it's been, well, we're talking about 20 years since the Sydney Olympics, but this is such an exciting event for not only the world, but Australia as well and our athletes.
Well, it certainly is. I mean, as Matt would certainly know, all Olympic Games are important, obviously, goes without saying. But these games are particularly important for Australia. Our athletes and sports, since the Rio Games, have been preparing well. They've put a lot of effort. Many have been up there for several years now with camps and so forth in Japan. There's a lot of opportunity, which is starting to come through in the various disciplines around Australia. But it's also a great opportunity because it's the closest thing to a home games. Because the same time...
Say 9 hours up the road, isn't it?
Well, it's 9 hours up the road, and it's a 1 hour time difference between East Coast and a 1 hour time difference West Coast. So it's an opportunity for, which is what the AOC is concentrating on, is for Australians to get right behind their team and also celebrate sport. And the need to get more Australians involved in sport is never been more needed at this particular moment.
Jamie, you've been on the show. You're an old regular on this program now. But M&C Saatchi, a really nice relationship with the AOC.
Yeah, well, Matt and the team brought us on as the official partner of the AOC, which is an incredible privilege. You know, we're a sport and entertainment agency, so to be almost nominated for the Olympics is an incredible kind of backing of our credentials. But also, we're incredibly humbled by the opportunity, and it's a huge chance for us to play a significant role in sport in this country. So we're working with the AOC to look at how do we drive participation. This is a 1 in a 4 year opportunity for a lot of these sports to have a light shone on them. And, you know, we've got 50% of teenagers dropping out of sport. So the real opportunity for us is to showcase all these sports and all these opportunities for the next generation to get involved in.
Shervo, we just did see some of those images pop up on screen of the stadium. Yeah. You've got word on the ground. They're the latest shots of that stadium.
They are. They were literally taken by my mate yesterday. Interesting story here because they're going to host the Rugby World Cup at the end of the year, Tokyo as well, or Japan generally. And the aim was to complete this stadium and to have some Rugby World Cup games there. Unfortunately, they failed to do that, which means that they were going to have a rectangular field within the stadium. And like Rio, for the first time ever, they took the athletics out of the main stadium and had football there, which they're a football-loving nation. We can understand why. But
didn't fit though. Look, anecdotally, as a layperson looking outside in, it just didn't
That's the
work
tradition,
for me.
Isn't it? I mean, this is what the Olympic Games were based on. So the good news is that a couple of weeks ago they said, no, what we'll do is, unfortunately, we're going to miss out on the Rugby World Cup, but let's put athletics back in the main stadium. So that's huge. And for someone that is a little disappointed that the Olympic Games are going to have a massive challenge, it's called Life AU, which is Life After Usain. It's going to be difficult to attract an audience for athletics, but the great news is, what an opportunity for some young stars to thrust their name forward. And Jamie just said it, you know, this is participation. This is about giving great athletes an opportunity. And as far as I understand, Matt, Australia want to send one of the biggest teams they've sent offshore.
It will be one of the largest teams ever. The final, the decision, well, the final numbers won't be known until next year, when we, particularly around softball and baseball qualification, that will finally top. But it could be 450, 460 athletes, wow, which will be one of the biggest teams in Sydney.
And it's so much has changed when you look back at 1964 and our athletes. We had extraordinary athletes we have for a long, long time, but to see the way that the AOC has grown to the point now where our athletes are looked after in the way they are. We still obviously need to raise funds for a lot of our athletes, and I don't think we need to ignore that, but it's a lot better position now.
Well, it is, and one of the legacies of the Sydney Games was the Australian Olympic Foundation, and that's what it allowed for the Australian Olympic Committee to be totally independent. So we neither seek nor receive any funding from federal government. What we ask for is the government to fund the sports. And obviously the AOC also provides medal incentive funding directly to athletes, and so that everyone is benefiting from the growth of sport. The one thing about these games, of course, going back to 1964 to now, is all the new sports. Skateboarding, surfing, 3-on-3 basketball, the gender relay in triathlon and in swimming as well. So it's going to be a very different sort of games.
And in terms of finance, Jamie, I mean, what marketing opportunities do the Olympics provide?
Well, I think this, to Matt's point, this will be one of the biggest Olympic Games ever. Bigger than Sydney. We've got the time zone, but then you've got all the social media around the Olympics as well. So there's so many opportunities for brands to get involved. And Matt, we were talking about Olympics Unleashed and how that's a great program for supporting individual athletes as well. So as the games have become more dynamic and more sophisticated, there's so many more opportunities for brands to get involved.
Can I just mention Olympics Unleashed? Because this was an initiative and this changes the landscape for athletes. And I say that in the most positive of ways, because Olympics Unleashed is a school visit program, simply. It's a system where athletes can come in and book times to go to schools all over Australia and talk to students to allay their experiences and the inspirational stories that they have. And I think that in itself is brilliant. But the AOC have allowed them to have presentation schooling, so education and an understanding of how to best present to kids and audiences, and that means that's a gift that they can have for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and you get that beautiful flow-on effect of the generations then, don't you?
Absolutely.
Look, I could talk about this all day. I just want to leave this last one with you, Matt, because in 1976 in Montreal, I remember my grandmother hired us out a colour TV, a coloured Rank Arena TV. My brothers and I and sister stayed up all night watching it. And that is what the magic of the Olympic Games does. We've seen the dramas in Iran and things this morning. What an Olympic Games does is it brings people together so beautifully.
It brings the world together, and it brings the world together. It doesn't matter whether you're rich, poor or indifferent. And, the athletes can be, yeah, sure, Usain Bolt superstar, or one of our up-and-coming athletes in table tennis. He's Edmund Hu. He's just made the top 100 in the world. Now, he's not going to win a gold medal, but that doesn't matter. The whole world comes together to celebrate. There's a refugee team now which the IOC is supporting. So, and the Japanese, as we all know, are a great welcoming group. So I think it's going to be a fantastic Olympics, and Australia's going to basically be there live.
Let the games begin. Thanks for coming in, gentlemen.
Thanks so much, Des. We appreciate your time.